Even when I rebooted, it still didn't work. I am finally live. I think I'm live. I would really like some reassuring messages to show that my audio actually works, because I couldn't get the camera. So I went into Chrome and I did the same thing I always do. No problems. I go in there, live stream in YouTube, make the thing take the snapshot. I know I'm lost for words. This is so frustrating. Make the thing take the snapshot, and we go. And as soon as I load up Chrome, it can't see the camera. And I tweeted this message just before. It's like, hey, can't see the camera. Like maybe something else is accessing it. And it's like, no, there's no processors accessing it. All right, I'll reboot. That'll fix it. And then I'll unplug it and I'll plug it back in again. And that'll fix it. And out of desperation, I sort of got to the point where I went like, what's the one thing that I have changed since I did this last week? And it is the new audio setup and the new digital to analog converter. And I unplugged that and suddenly the camera works straight away. Burton, g'day. Thanks for joining. Can you confirm, please, Burton, that my audio is coming through? Because I've had to grab the old DAC out of the cupboard, plug it all back in again, do a really quick test, and here we go. So, all right, so I do see a comment here, not just a DAC. All right, cool. People hearing me. All right, good. So you can hear me complain about it now. It's a real shame because my plan was, based on the list here, I was going to talk about how amazingly well all of this is working. And in fairness, it is only one thing, which now I can sort out later on. And it probably wasn't a really biggie were it not for the fact that it was right as I tried to start this. So anyway, here we go. Let me come back to that. I will get back to it. All right, so number of different things today. In fact, we've got a whole bunch of different things on my list, one of which, of course, is the audio, and I will come back to that a little bit later on. First thing is just a thank you to everyone that jumped in and helped support my daughter, Elle, with fundraising to plant trees at school. So she's got a little competition here going with the friends. Obviously, it's all organized through the school where all the kids are trying to raise money in order to invest a bit in the school, and also every $15 they get to plant a tree, and they're very excited about the trees. And I tweeted this out the other day, and I just got so many people just chuck in even a few little bucks to help pump her up to, they've raised in Aussie dollars $2,060 as at the moment. So we've got to the end of the month. I'm going to drop the link here in the comments. And as I sort of said in the original tweet, if you were thinking of donating to Have I Been Pwned and buy me like a coffee, give it to the kids instead and let them put it into the school and plant some trees. But a big genuine thanks to people. It's really, really nice to see the comments in here as well about people going, hey, thanks for Have I Been Pwned stuff. Here's a tree. So honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for helping support the kids. She's very, very excited about this. Okay, so we're going to move on. Now, the next thing in my list was the speakers. And plan A was I was going to talk about how absolutely freaking amazing these new Genelic speakers are. So let's do that, and then we'll talk about everything that went wrong later on. I tweeted the setup that I was looking at getting, and this is in response to my old Logitech, I always forget the model number, like Z5550 something, eventually dying. And this was this Logitech gear. It was sort of the old 5.1 Dolby Digital kind of setup, which originally I bought to put in the bedroom a decade and a half ago. And I was going to like every now and then watch a movie in bed or something like that. I don't know what exactly I was thinking. And I never really ended up using it for that. And before too long, it ended up on the computer. And it was just my day in, day out, like for nearly 15 years kind of thing, audio system for the PC. And it lasted exceptionally well. And every time I took a photo of the desk with that, people go, oh, that's the Logitech Z whatever. It's amazing. And it was really great until it wasn't. And the bit where it became not great was that it just continually started to drop out the audio altogether, probably several weeks ago. And I'd do what all good technical professionals do when something doesn't work. I'd reboot it. So I'd pull the power, put it back in, it would come back. So it clearly wasn't like a blown fuse where I could just replace that. A lot of people were like, just replace the fuse. So it wasn't that. So it did go the way of e-waste. I I just can't live with something that is unreliable for audio. The amount of time I spend doing like workshops and conferences and videos and all that sort of stuff, if I have any doubt whatsoever that my gear's not going to work right, like what happened this morning, I've got to get on and fix that stuff right up. The other thing is that I wanted to get gear that I expect will last another 15 years. And because I expect to get so much time out of it and live with it so much, I was willing to get something a bit nicer. Now, I didn't know how deep that rabbit hole went. And in my naivety, I was thinking, I will ask Twitter about a good audio setup for PC. And like 70% of people will go, this one over here is really good. And it will be some number of hundreds of dollars, and I'll go and get it and I'll plug it in and it will be good and I'll be happy. And then I started getting all of this feedback that just, it kind of went in different directions, but there was a theme. And the theme was to get studio monitors. So speakers that are not necessarily made for PCs, but the sorts of stuff that you might use in a recording studio or something like that, and get a good digital analog converter. And then there were lots of different views about which ones to get. A lot of people saying get effectively bookshelf speakers, which may be about sort of yay big, like literally the kind you'd sit on a bookshelf. And there are use cases where that makes sense. And I was looking at a lot of setups that people have, particularly people that are in like the recording industry, and they've got them around their PCs, and they'd have a big screen in front and a speaker there and a speaker there. My problem is I've got a big screen in front and another big screen there and another big screen there. So that wasn't going to work. And I could have possibly mounted them up behind it, but that's getting, I need more brackets and more arms and extensions and things like that. So I wanted speakers that were a similar size to the outgoing ones, so things that I could fit under the monitors. So my monitors, I measured them the other day, are about 23 centimeters off the desk. They are the perfect eye height for when I'm sitting at the perfect height with my arms at the perfect elevation for the keyboard. I've had RSI before from spending too much time doing this shit. Like, I don't want to make things any worse than they have to be. So the only speakers I could find that sort of met that high-end criteria were Genelic. Now, I'd not heard of Genelic before. It's a Finnish brand, i.e. from Finland. And they make very good gear that wasn't cheap, but it's very good gear. So it was one of these, look, they're pre-tax expenses as well. This is absolutely positively my business. So fortunately, we get to write these things off a little bit. So I got the little studio speakers that sit there under the monitors, and I got their subwoofer as well, which sits in under the desk. And then I got an Apollo Twin digital analog converter, which was perfect up until I started to record this video. The converter's been great because I've been able to run the existing mic into it. So I got rid of the old Yamaha Audiogram 3 that I've had for ages and ages. And of course, the Genelics run straight out of here as well for the audio. And I've just been working through, there's a Cambridge audio playlist on Spotify for audio that they use to sound check their gear. And it's been epic. The speakers are so nice. I mean, super, super, super nice. Like beyond what I ever expected to have out of a speaker on a PC. So I have been exceptionally happy with that. And now I've just got to figure out, why is it when that sucker's plugged in there, the camera doesn't want to work? So anyway, that's a new thing for me to Google. At least I know what is causing the camera to drop out now. So looking at the comments, Ali says, Apollo Twin is a complex audio interface. It is not a class compliant interface, requires proprietary drivers, but has internal DSP. You could add real-time filters such as compressor to it. So this is one of the things I kind of only realized afterwards, and there's not a lot of value for me in this, but there are a whole bunch of audio filters which can run in real time in the compressor. So if I wanted to sound like a Dalek, or if I wanted to add reverb or something like that, it can do it on the fly in the unit just here, which when I was looking at the Apollo training videos, there's like a guy in a studio with a girl who's singing, and she's like, I want more reverb in my voice. And it's done in real time in the device just here, rather than having to add it as an after effect. So that was pretty cool. It took me a bit of mucking around just to figure out how to do stuff like, when I'm talking into the microphone here, I don't want to hear it back through the speakers. But I guess if you're like a singer and you got headphones on and you're singing into the microphone, then you want to hear it back in the headphones. So just little stuff like that has taken me a bit to get to grips with. I now have to get to grips with how to make the camera work whilst I've got this thing in. So that's my next challenge. Steve says, my Eterel 4-inch studio monitors have been great for 15 years and still going strong. And I guess the thing as well with studio monitors like this, where it's like monitor, sub, DAC, I can replace individual things. I don't know what died in the old Logitech, but possibly trying to find someone who had spare parts or something, and that itself is a time sink. It was really like pick the whole thing up and throw it out. Troy got Genelic, nice die-cast aluminium one. So I posted a tweet yesterday where I showed the Logitech units that I had borrowed from my daughter, which are physically a very, very similar size, but I put them both on a scale, and these Genelic ones weigh 2.5 times more. So the Genelic ones, they're only about like yay big, I think 19 centimeters high, and they weigh about, I think it was like 1.6 kilos. So they're a very, very solid unit. And then some people said apparently some speaker manufacturers have been busted in the past, like putting lead or rocks in the speakers just to make them heavier so they feel nicer. Apparently that's not what Genelic do. That they are, as I have since learned, a very reputable brand. You can buy a mic and they'll DSP sound correct, yeah, which is more stuff I need to learn. I believe Troy has a nice Rode, so I have a Rode Broadcaster, which is the microphone that we see just here. I've been really, really happy with this mic actually. So that's been good news. The next thing I'm doing actually in the whole sound quality space, and I've mentioned this before, is working on the room. So this the house that I live in here. So I moved in here. When was it? 5.5 years ago, and it felt pretty modern at the time, but it had been renovated. It must be about 13 to 14 years before now. So I guess 9 years or something before. So it's kind of that 15-year kind of age now. And things like the carpets are a bit, feeling like 15-year-old carpets. A lot of the colors feel very beige. Not at the moment because they're all like pink and blue because of my lights. So one of the things I'm doing in this office is replacing the carpets with something that's just going to be a lot nicer and lusher, getting rid of the fairly hard blinds with much heavier, softer curtains, repainting some stuff, and doing some more soundproofing. So I've got a big flat white wall there, which is just going to be bouncing sound all over the place. That's going to have a bunch of sound deadening material on it. And then the wall behind me, I've shown before, there's some really, really cool looking sound deadening stuff you can put on, which is like pleasing to look at, as well as obviously being functional. So I think that's going to make a big difference in the room. So that'll be one of the next things that hopefully I'll be able to do over the coming weeks. I literally had carpet people in here yesterday. So that will be coming as well. What else we got in here? Probably OBS will work with Twin Audio. So I did actually start going down the OBS route again only 15 minutes ago, and I was having this problem. And I've used it in the past, but it does require some thinking to get it set up and get it right. And I was like, do I really want to be trying to make this work immediately before I go on air and do this? So this was a better immediate term solution. Steve says, I've had my USB camera stop working when adding other USB devices. This was due to USB controller running out of resources. Too many devices on the one controller. That's an interesting point. I should consider that. I wonder if I unplug some of the other USB things, if that will fix the problem. I'll give that a go. I've actually got, I think it might be on a separate controller, but there are USB 3 ports, or USB-C rather, ports on the back of this Lenovo desktop machine I got, as well as all the other USB ports. There are, in fairness, a lot of USB ports. I think there's like 6 USB 3 on the back and then another 4 on the front and then a couple of USB-Cs. And I got a lot of them plugged in too. So good point there. I might just start by unplugging stuff and see if that works at all. Oh, look at that. My lights just turned off. My lights turned off because I put my sensor behind my glass of water and it couldn't see me moving and it decided there was no one in the room. I'm going to talk more about IoT today as well. Could be power issues with USB. Are you buying a new desk for the office? Yes, so I'm actually getting a new desk made. So there's a couple of problems with the desk layout here. And in case anyone's interested, I wrote a blog post called Building the Ultimate Home Office. It was the second half of last year. I think it was July or August. And that succeeded the previous blog post from about 10 years earlier are on the same topic. And this same desk was in both. And the desk has been good, but there are several problems with it. One of the problems is that the space where I put my legs, either side of the legs of the table, is about the width of this, just slightly wider than the width of this chair. And very often Charlotte and I sit here together and we work on things together, and it's very hard to sort of get both of us in front of the computer at once. So I want to get, I'm going to get a wider desk made with the wider openings, and then I'll get another chair in here so that we can both sort of sit here together and have full access to everything on the PC. I want to sort of get more things off the desk and into cupboards and things. I'll get new stuff made behind me so that it all gets enclosed and it's less crap floating around. And basically, because I spend a massive part of my life in here, and let's face it, we're going to be doing it for a long time because I don't see me traveling again this year, just sort of lifting the standard of the office. So yeah, there'll be new desks and things like that. But hey, look, I've had, I must have had about 12 years out of this one. So it's been a pretty good run. I'm happy with that. All right, let me move on to other things. So been doing a bunch in the 3D space, the 3D printing space. So one of the things I did was I did eventually install Octopi the other day. So Octopi is the 3D printer management software, free open source stuff. You'll normally run it on Raspberry Pi. So rather than having like an SD card and continually going down to the printer and plugging the SD card in and using the clunky little interface to print from there, you can print directly to the Octopi server, and then it can monitor the printer and it can give you all your temperatures and other stats about the printer. It gives you some control features. You can plug in a webcam, and then it can either just show the webcam surfaced in the UI, which is actually really cool. So when I'm sitting here working, I can just put the webcam on another monitor or on my iPad or something, and I can sort of see the thing growing like that. It can also do a time lapse with the webcam using different sort of approaches. So there's a plugin called Octolapse, and Octolapse can do things like after every layer has printed, move the bed forward, move the hot end to the back, and it sort of brings everything to the same position, grabs a snapshot, moves the bed back, keeps printing. So you end up with a time lapse that looks like the thing's just growing out of the bed, and you don't even see the hot end because that's disappeared over the back of the frame. Really, really cool, but continually moving the hot end away from the model isn't great for the print quality. So I tried that once. I can probably tweak a few things, but I might not do much more of that. The other good thing is because I've put in I think like a 32 gig micro SD card into the Pi, I'm just starting to save all my models on there. So if I want to go and print a model again, everything is there on the Pi. So that's been good. And then I've been doing lithophanes as well, which is really cool. So what you do, and I'm going to put all this in a blog post, particularly about how to use the 3D printer for getting kids involved, because the kids are really loving this. So there's a website where you can take a photo, you can drop it into a little tool, which will then create it into like a 3D model. So if you pick a photo, there's highlights and lowlights, etc., and it actually changes the elevation of those on a model. You can then take that into your slicer software, and the ones that I've been doing the last couple of days is when it's in the slicer software, I've been making them about 2.4 millimeters high, which you can do from this website. And then you go into the slicer software and you put a color change at, say, 1.5 millimeters high. So it prints from the bottom up to a certain point, color change. So the printer stops, it beeps. You go down, you put a different filament color in, and then it prints a different color on top of it. And it looks epic. It looks super, super, super cool. So it looks like a printed black and white photo, or one of the ones I printed was a black bottom and then a gold top on it. And they come out looking really, really, really neat. So that's just the sort of stuff that the kids have a lot of fun with as well. And I want to get them creating things digitally, which then manifest themselves physically, so that they can sort of see the process of creating something tangible, which they can then hold. So that's been really good. I'm going to show a lot more of that over coming weeks. And as I said, I will actually put all of this in a blog post, because lots of people have been saying, what's the software you've been using? And to be clear, like, I'm just reading other people's stuff and finding the things that I think are cool, but I will consolidate all that as well. All right, other comments here. Nick007 says, I've also had USB camera issues all month, had to kill the Windows new device sound because I get that alert every 30 seconds. That was happening to me the other day too. It absolutely drove me nuts. But We love it though, don't we? We do love playing with the technology. Speaking of technology, so I got my weather station up as well. I ordered a Davis Vantage Pro weather station probably about 6 weeks ago now. It only just arrived. And that is a very, very nice professional looking unit. There's photos of it on my Twitter feed. When I say I've got it up, I've bolted it all together, configured it. There's a wireless base station that sits over there that has its own RF frequency that it talks to the weather station with, and then it Wi-Fi's onto my local network. Now, one of the things about the weather station is that you've got to put it at the highest possible point on your roof, and then they say preferably about 2 meters above the roof. Now, I don't want to go climb. Number one, I don't really want to go climbing around on my roof because it's a long fall if I screw that up. And second of all, I've got to actually get a pole fitted up there. So I've got some plumbers doing some work at the moment. And they're going to come around with one of those big aerials that you'd normally use for like TV signal and put that right up the top of the roof. And in the interim, I've just mounted it in a very suboptimal location just to start recording data and get the integration set up. So there's not a direct integration into Home Assistant. However, what you can do is I've got it somewhere here on one of my gazillion tabs, you can actually hit an IP address on the device, or rather the IP address of the device, and then you go /v1 /current conditions, and you get all of the current state data back. So you get things like, I'm looking at it now, the humidity, the direction of the wind chill. There's probably about 20 different things that come back from there. And then what you can do is you can go into Home Assistant and you can create a new sensor, and the sensor is just an API call into here, and then you've got to get the attributes out and read them all. Long story short is I can poll it, I think, every few seconds if I want from Home Assistant, pull all this data out, job done. The app it comes with is actually equal parts good and shitty. And I'll explain what I mean by this. It comes with an app called WeatherLink. And WeatherLink, if I drill down into this, fairly basic looking little weather app, like the one I'm holding up on my phone. And I'm sort of seeing the current temperature, which is great. Today's high, today's low. It's currently 26C. I'm dressed all beachy because I was just out having a walk with Charlotte. And man, I came back sweating. Like it's autumn, but it was warm out there because that sun is blasting. The problem with this is that it seems to only send updates to the online weather API like once an hour, and then there's an upgrade button here, and it's like if you would like to see your weather in finer grain increments than like once every hour, you got to start paying money. And this was an expensive weather station, so it just feels like a really shitty business model. But you can hit the local API on the local IP address as frequently as you like and feed into Home Assistant. So this is going to be the worst ROI ever because it's probably much cheaper just to go and pay for the service. But I really want to have all of this data in Home Assistant and lots of local information there. I don't feel that I need to go to the cloud to pull this back. Okay, so that's the weather station. Now onto cyber, and there's a couple of cyber things here that I think are interesting. Then I want to talk about this ID and social media platform thing that blew up the other day. Let's talk about Gab. Why do I do this to myself? Now, Gab, the alternative to the mainstream social media platforms, is the much more right-leaning political spectrum. There are other terms that people have used for people on Gab, which are derogatory, and frankly, I don't like, because I think sort of casting everyone on a platform under the same term is a very emotional response that doesn't really help us have objective discussions about the platform and the people and what it's actually doing. Gab did have a data breach. They had a lot of information extracted. It was 4 million records. We knew that something like, I think there were about 60,000 email addresses I put in Have I Been Pwned, and there were about 7,000 bcrypt hashes. And this data was taken from the platform. I get the sense that the person who grabbed it had a little bit of a vendetta against Gab's unwillingness to censor speech which other platforms would censor. That's probably the nicest way to put it. So someone grabbed this data. They sent it to DDoS Secrets, which is a registered non-profit organization that does harbor a lot of data which has been leaked. I'm just going to be careful with the words I put there because I think it is a little bit of a grey space that they occupy here. Now, DDoS Secrets then gave that data to some reporters, and they gave that data to me as well for Have I Been Pwned. Now, it is legitimate data. My record was in there. I created an account back in January when Gab and Parler started getting a lot of traction in the wake of Twitter kicking off Trump or basically everyone kicking off Trump and a lot of people going to alternate platforms. So I wanted to, first of all, get my little Troy Hunt stake in that platform just in case it was something of use later on. And second of all, just get a bit of a sense of what is this thing? Like what are people seeking by going to this platform? So the fact that my own data was in there did make it easier to verify the breach. Now, Gab never came out and did what I would call a reasonable disclosure statement. Like, hey, well, we've been hacked. Here's what we know. Here's what's out there. Here's what we're doing. Sending an email to all of your customers and actually letting them know that you've had a breach. That is usually the done thing. That didn't happen. And instead, there was lots of... Again, I'm going to try and be as objective as I can about the terms I use here. There was lots of messaging from the CEO in particular about trying to be censored by left-leaning media and by people trying to erode Christianity. And the thing gets very religious very, very quickly, which I find super, super odd for something that's meant to be like a social media platform. But anyway, they still haven't disclosed the fact that they had a breach to the individuals in there. Otherwise, I would have had an email. And time went by, and then someone went through and grabbed a whole bunch of OAuth tokens, which were still active, effectively went through and session hijacked, I think, about 175 accounts, posted messages to those accounts, being derogatory to the CEO, and then having a mosaic made up of individual photos of Gab profile users that looked like Jack Sparrow. It's creative. It's creative hacking. I'll give it that much. But the messaging that's come through from Gab just... Like I tweeted this the other day, and in fact, there's been another email that's come to me since. It's obviously just gone to all Gab subscribers. It's just super, super weird because the whole thing, like we look at the links and things that the CEO is putting in here. The Republicans embrace white Christian nationalism and the decomposing trajectory of the GOP. One link. Another link. Christian nationalism and its role in insurrection and impeachment. And it just goes on and on. And I sort of tweeted this and went... This is basically like, here's what's in the messages they're sending. A politician said something mean about us because they're very upset that the Texan Republican government has basically said that Gab people are not so nice. Some people disagreed with him. Gab sent millions of emails about it. They're saying that we're really, really big. That's why we're in the news. They're still talking about literal demon hackers, very, very into Jesus, but nothing about a data breach. It's, every now and then, like there's a car crash on the road and you're driving past the car crash and you're like, I know I shouldn't look at this, but I just can't help but look at it because I have a morbid fascination. And that is what this feels like. And I just wonder where it will end because I wonder how long they're going to be able to maintain this. It looks like they've been booted by a bunch of banks as well. Anyway, I don't want to make this all about the Gab thing. I think at the moment it's gone beyond the InfoSec stuff, and it's more just that sort of slow motion car crash that is just hard to look away from. All right, looking at some of the comments here. Gab, the gift that keeps on giving. It's pretty much that. It's because there's always something, right? Going back to here, Gab itself is a Mastodon fork. Messed up the code and added many vulnerabilities, violated the GPL license, and finally got hacked. So from memory, the GPL license required them to make publicly available any modifications to the code. They pulled that once they started introducing vulnerabilities that had SQLi in them, and it's just it is a real mess from top to bottom. And I think it's things like this as well which will eventually make it. I see a point where it's going to be impossible to keep the thing running because so much support has been pulled or actions are brought against them. So that's my gut feel. I don't know how long it will be, but I can't see them able to continue this downward spiral for perpetuity. You've got to hit the bottom at some point. It was also blocked by other Mastodon instances. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? All right, back to weather stations. James says, weather stations can be easily poisoned by anything nearby influencing it. Which one did you get? Weather underground. Which one did you get? Weather underground support. So I got the Davis Vantage Pro 2. And you're right, you got to not have stuff around it. You don't want trees on top of it because that could, or above it, that could mess up everything from the rain through to the wind flow, through to things falling into the rain collection unit. The ideal position is going to be at the highest point of the house. There is nothing above that. And the only trick then is to make sure that the anemometer is high enough that the shape of the roof doesn't affect the wind readings, and also to make sure that the integrated, they call it the ISS, I think it's the integrated sensor system or something, is high enough that any heat absorbed by the dark tiles in the roof isn't radiated back and adversely impacts the temperature reading. But when it's all done, assuming it sits right on the top of the house, that should be the absolutely perfect position for it. Okay, something else, which was also interesting this week, LeakBase. Now, LeakBase was like a super shady have I been pwned, which followed the other super shady have I been pwned, which was leaked source. So leaked source got taken down, I think it was start of 2017. I remember where I was in Belgium when it got taken down. And the value proposition of leaked source was, you know how you search have I been pwned and it says, hey, look, here are the data breaches this email address has been in, and then that's it. This was like, here are the data breaches this email address has been in, pay us money and we'll give you all the data for this account. And people literally went and bought my data and then sent it to me. It's like, hey, just so you're aware, here's like your phone number and your physical address and all this other stuff that have been leaked, as well as your passwords, either as hashes or the cracked versions now in plain text, because they were going out cracking passwords as well. So they got taken down. Discovered the guy running that was a bloke who was in his early to mid 20s called Jordan Bloom. And I always I always use this when I talk about who is behind these services, because I think it was really funny that Jordan obviously made attempts to run the service and not be personally tied back to it. So he wanted to make sure that it wasn't obvious it was him running the service. But then he used the money he got from selling the data to go and buy a bright green Lamborghini. Now, I have no problems with bright green Lamborghinis. I would love to have a bright green Lamborghini. But if you're trying to fly under the radar, and particularly when you're a young man in your early 20s, driving around a bright green Lamborghini sticks out like, as we'd say in Australia, sticks out like dog balls. Now, why he'd do that, I don't know. Anyway, that was leaked source. So LeakBase was a similar sort of thing. And they eventually got taken down, I think it was early last year, like Jan, Feb last year. So not a big surprise there, same sort of thing. And then they hit the news just in the last week because they had a Stripe account to accept payments. The email address used on the Stripe account belonged to a different domain. It wasn't like leakbase.com or whatever primary domain they ran off. It was something like wli.design or another completely different domain. Now, someone saw that this domain came up for renewal and they snared the domain, and then they created a mailbox on the domain such that they could do a password reset via Stripe. So obviously no 2FA as well, log into Stripe, and now they've got a list of all of the customers who paid by credit card. Of course, if you pay by Bitcoin or something, you're not going to end up in Stripe. But in total, there were, I think, 11,000 something unique email addresses, and you've got payment histories as well. So now you've got a list of all of these people who have paid LeakBase in order to access data, which was ultimately used for things like identity theft. And that is a very, very uncomfortable for those people, or uncomfortable position for those people to be in, surely. So that was quite a. It was a little bit funny. Maybe not if you're in there, but it was a little bit funny to observe it from a distance. Going, hey, people who are, and in fairness as well, there are people who say run penetration testing companies, and they use this data as part of legal, legitimate engagements they're involved in. In fact, a friend of mine was in there, and I pinged him and I went, hey, just so you know, like your data's in there, and this was his use case. But I bet there's a lot of people in there that are doing things that are a lot shadier than that. All right, last one. And this one is, boy, oh boy, this one caused some controversy. So just before I read this one, Bert, and I just noticed your comment here as well, you have to make sure the weather station is easy to maintain, cleaning the rain bucket. Well, I don't have to clean the rain out of it. Like that'll drain out. If it is on the very top of the roof, which is really above all the tree levels here as well, it should be very clean, and it's even got little spikes around the edge so no birds sit on it and then shit in the bucket and you've got to clean that. So it should be very, very clean. But if I need to, I can get up on the roof. I've done it before. I don't particularly like doing it because, again, it's a long way down. I can get up on the roof and clean it. So moving on. Friday, not long after I did the last video and just before I went out for a nice dinner where I didn't really want to be thinking about Twitter, I shared a petition. Now, this is from Petition's petition.parliament.uk. And the petition is make verified ID a requirement for opening a social media account. Now, I want to be clear, like when I share something, it doesn't necessarily mean I endorse the thing. And I think I made this pretty clear in the tweet, and I'll read the tweet in just a moment. And it's the same as when I share something from Gab. I do not agree with just about everything they say, but it is significant and it's noteworthy and it's worthy of discussion. So anyway, here's the petition. Make it a legal requirement when opening a new social media account to provide a verified form of ID. Where the account belongs to a person under the age of 18, verify the account with the ID of a parent guardian to prevent anonymised harmful activity, providing traceability if an offence occurs. And when you drill into the detail here, the person who's created this petition says, my son Harvey is disabled. He is also the kind and gentle son of a person regularly in the public eye. Now, I'm not sure who this person is. Does it give you the name? I assume it is someone in the public eye, Katie Price. So if someone knows who Katie Price is, drop me a note here in the comments on YouTube. But anyway, so Katie's made this. The impression I get from this is that she's in the public eye. Her son has been targeted by online abuse due to his disability, which would be, it'd be atrocious as a parent for any of your children, whether they're able-bodied or not, to have that sort of abuse that it sounds like she's had. To have a child who's disadvantaged as well and to have that sort of abuse must feel absolutely horrific for her. And I think that this is where she is coming from. Now, the thing is that when you, so Nick 007's here says, English media personality, model and businesswoman. All right, so someone obviously who has some social clout. When a petition here on this government service, and in fact, I'll read what it says here. Government responds to all petitions that get more than 10,000 signatures. Parliament will consider any petitions that get to 100,000 signatures. They'll consider it for debate. Now, this is at 159,000 signatures. And the thing I think that's noteworthy here is that 159,000 people are getting behind this, who want to have it debated in Parliament. Doesn't mean it goes through, it doesn't mean it passes. To be honest, I don't think there's any way it will. But it means that there are enough people behind it that it's noteworthy enough for Parliament to debate it and consider it. Now, I tweeted this and I said, here's exactly what my tweet says. This is interesting. Would requiring a verified ID to open a social media account do more good by cutting down on anonymous trolls, or more harm by depriving people of their privacy? To some extent, both, but would it be a net positive or a net negative? Now, I am having it a bit both ways, if I'm honest, because I can see both sides of the argument here. And no matter how much you are on either side of the spectrum, you must see that there is the opposite side of the spectrum, and there is some good and there is some harm. And the debate for Parliament then will be, is it a net negative or a net positive? My suspicion is that it will be an overwhelming net negative. And I position that tweet neutrally enough for people to be able to have the discussion, hopefully in a reasonable adult fashion. But then I forgot it was Twitter. so a bunch of people were really, I'm going to sound very formal and British now, really quite rude in some of their responses about this. How dare you even share this? You know, how on earth could you even entertain this? Well, because it has so much support, it will be heard in Parliament, and that makes it noteworthy. You can't just sort of go, I think I'm so much against this that I'm just going to ignore it and not even discuss it, because it is a thing and it will go before Parliament. And like I said, I think that it will come out and this will never get through for all sorts of reasons, some of which we'll discuss in a moment. But it's almost a little bit like the Gab thing. If you get to the point of saying this is this is so terrible to me that anyone even sharing it is a bad person and I will not have discussion about it. This really is not the right attitude. It's not going to move us forward. It doesn't just disappear because of that. It disappears because we have objective debate about it and we rationalize it and we have reasonable discussion, which hopefully in the case of Gab eventually leads to its demise. And in the case of this petition, I think it will eventually lead to its demise. Now, getting back a little bit more objectively, one of the really constant themes here is that it would be very difficult, particularly for the LGBTQI community. A lot of people there want to have anonymity, which I think is very reasonable. And I think for the most part, people should deserve to have anonymity in these discussions. Interestingly, that the few people I saw who were more towards the middle of the discussion were people like myself who have been on the receiving end of some really vitriolic trolling behavior in the past. And I can't help but think a lot of people who cannot see that side of it at all have not had to experience things like death threats, which I've had before. It's not fun getting that shit on social media. Even if I don't take it at all seriously, it's just not fun seeing that. Some of the other things, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, that I've seen very recently, it's not fun seeing that. And being able to do that with the confidence that there are no reprisals is a very worrying situation. So that's where those people are coming from. Looking through the other tweets here, the other responses here, that there is a difference between needing to provide identity information to a provider versus providing information which is immediately visible to everyone. And I think this is one of the issues that people conflated a little bit. If you had to identify yourself before creating an account, and again, I'm not for this, I'm just playing out the different possible ways this could work. If you had to identify yourself to a provider, that doesn't necessarily mean that you then have to have complete transparency of that identity through onto the social media platform. It may be that you have to identify yourself if there is ever a legal process which is begun and there is due process followed, then your identifiable information could be retrieved by law enforcement or whatever else it may be. Now, I do think that there is a difference between the two. There is, of course, the argument that if you get owned Gab style, then all of your information may eventually be disclosed anyway, and then that is a risk. And it's a very real risk that needs to be considered. There's also abuse by operators within the social media platform. There's abuse by governments. Like, there are lots of different problems in here, but it's not as black and white as if we have to provide identity document, then you're immediately like self-doxing anyway. There might be another middle ground in here as well, where perhaps one of the middle grounds is, let's say it's a platform like Twitter. There is an equivalent of the blue check mark, which is people who are willing to be identified. And perhaps those who are at the targeted receiving end of vitriolic trolling behavior get to just filter out the stuff that doesn't come from people who aren't willing to be identified. Yeah, maybe that's a middle ground, and then people get to choose. But I don't think people should be excluded from a platform like Twitter just because they don't want to provide identifying documentation. All right, let's see some of the comments in here. So, used to be married to a singer and Gold Coast local, Peter Andre. Oh, she used to be married to Peter Andre. Wow, okay. If you don't know who Peter Andre is, look at that. That's kind of fascinating, but kind of useless as well, I guess. It'd be UK law, so a small portion of Twitter's user base. I can't imagine it being effective. And this was one of the very valid things that people raised. They're like, Twitter is a global social media platform. A law like this would be a law that is passed in a jurisdiction like in the UK. What's to stop someone from just going, I'm just going to VPN into France and then I'm going to sign up as a French user? I think there's another interesting sort of discussion here, which is when we have global platforms and localized laws, how does all that work? I mean, a good example of this is seeing things like platforms temporarily banned in countries like China or Turkey or Egypt or places like that, and people just then VPN out and they use it anyway. But it does also massively cut down on the usage of the platform. So I do think, particularly when we get to modern Western countries, the fact that, let's say, Scott Helm in the UK would have to provide identifiable documentation to use Twitter, and me here in Australia is like YOLO. I agree. I don't see that working at all. Yeah, 125 replies on Twitter, Ali. As I posted, if not shown publicly, it's far less of a problem. I don't think I would have had that much of a problem. I just won't use most of them. Ali says Orwell's 1984. There are bits of lots of what we're doing at the moment, which is very Orwellian. I think the difference is that the 1984 narrative was more around the primary objective of governments being to control the citizens, whereas what we're often seeing now that is akin to Orwellian doctrine, for want of a better term, is happening organically in response to the need to protect individuals. So something like this, I don't think that if this ever got traction, it would be because the government is like, oh, this is awesome, we're going to literally go out and do this to invade people's private lives. It's more in a response to the fact that there are a lot of irresponsible people on these social media platforms doing super, super nasty stuff. So that's where I feel it's just a little bit different to 1984 in terms of the intent. Steve says social media operators already have a whole bunch of information about us. Having verified IDs associated with gathered information such as likes, dislikes, subscriptions, etc. is scary. Well, I mean, and this is sort of the counter argument, right? Which is, if you think about the way most people use social media, they know with a very high degree of certainty who you are anyway. Not least of which because you're normally connecting from your home IP address. Like maybe you have an avatar which doesn't identify you, and you have a handle which doesn't identify you. Maybe you even have an email address which is like a generic something at protonmail.com, but then you connect from home. And most of the time you can be traced anyway. And this was sort of one of the counter arguments, which is a very valid argument. And it simply says that we already have lots of ways of tracking people down. Should they exhibit this sort of behavior, identity documentation, first of all, really doesn't give us anything that we don't have already. And secondly, just because someone can be identified doesn't stop them being a dick online. And these are very, very valid arguments. So there's one I can think of recently, which I won't go into now, where the let's call them the perpetrator is known, and the things they're doing are just absolutely obscene. So just because you know who they are doesn't mean they're not going to be dicks anymore. And that's a very, very valid observation. What does your verified ID show you probably don't already put on Facebook and Twitter? Very, very true. What would be an effective way to stop internet trolls without making social networks seem like Chinese internet? In my own personal experience, and I can't speak for this lady who probably has a lot more followers and a lot more vitriol than what I get. My own personal experience, like the thing that stops it is to turn them off. I mute super aggressively now. In fact, even in response to this thread, when people started getting nasty, it's like, I don't want to listen to you anymore. Mute. I go back to dinner. And look, I can say that in a little bit of a throwaway sense because I'm not possibly getting the sustained breadth of vitriolic trolling that perhaps this lady is receiving about her son. But honestly, like the only thing that we really have in our control that does actually work very effectively is to either turn the trolls off or turn the bloody Twitter off for a while. Not such a bad idea either. Let's go in here. Birth date, name, and surname and expiry date are public. Only non-public thing is my country's SSN equivalent, and that is somewhat public, and it's probably been leaked on a whole bunch of things. Anyway, certainly a lot of government-issued identifiers and have I been pwned, whether they be SSNs in the US or there's basically everyone in South Africa via the Master Deeds data breach as well. So we're talking about things that do get leaked. And I think maybe we just get to the point where we have to resign ourselves to the fact that there are always going to be nasty people in any sector of a community, whether it's a physical community or an online community. And the problem that this lady has, and I have probably to a much smaller degree, is that if you were to, let's say for argument's sake, 0.1% of the people that follow you are assholes. Right now, I got 176,000 followers or something like that. So that means that I'm going to have 700. I'm going to have about 176 people following me who are assholes. and then they're going to be, and in a year from now, it might be 200 people following me who are assholes. And that's just unfortunately the fact of life that we're going to have to deal with. And again, like I'm just I just mute early, go on and do something else, and then sometimes just turn the thing off for a while. So Nick 007 here says, doing some digging, her son was subject to pretty serious trolling in 2016. I think part of the challenge here as well is, and I only know what I've read on the petition and what I've read here in the comments, is if you're getting really serious trolling, what is the legal recourse? And how hard is it to actually get traction? And even then, is it against a collective of trolls or is it against an individual? And does it just go all Streisand on you? Like if you start doing this and it's someone in the public eye, how many other people then pile on? I just don't know that there's really much you can do in terms of recourse for something that is, I assume, just being insulting to a child. There are other forms of online abuse, particularly if it boils down to threats against your safety or things like that, where there's a much stronger legal recourse. But assuming it's calling the kids names and saying nasty things, I'm just not sure that you can really get much traction as an individual in that. He's also pretty seriously disabled, so I can kind of understand where she's coming from. And you're absolutely right. And this is what I think people need to understand. When they see a petition like this, it's there and it's got traction because it's having a really serious impact on someone's life. And some of the responses I got about people just being entirely dismissive of it and throwing it out and not even wanting to hear it, frankly, has been really insensitive to the position that this lady is in. And again, I don't think the answer is to have everyone verify their ID, but the answer is also not to just dismiss this whole thing and not be able to have a discussion about it at all. Big Pod says, I look at these things from threat perspectives and government-issued IDs, at least for my country, doesn't give much publicly unavailable or extremely hard to collect data. Look, let's see where this thing goes. Has it got a date on it? Do we know when this needs to happen? The deadline is the 5th of September, 2021. Well, obviously, they have massively exceeded the required signatures already anyway. So, look, let's watch this one. Again, I don't think that anything will actually change, but this is a perspective that's important to understand because it has a really serious impact, not just on this lady, but to many of us online to one degree or another. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to go and plug my old DAC, my new DAC back in, unplug my old DAC, and try and figure out how on earth I'm going to fix my audio so that hopefully when I come back to do this next week, I'll have the right DAC, the camera will work, and everything will be fine. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week a little bit later on in the day. See ya.